Your question is really good, I think. It's a good one, this question of how and why do Romani people connect to Gypsy Jazz and to Django Reinhardt and all that. Yes.
Yeah, that's actually something I want to touch on a bit later, actually. So how did you first begin playing the music in general? How did you learn to play Gypsy Jazz specifically?
Yeah, so I grew up in Norway, and back home, Gypsy Jazz, we don't use that term actually, like string swing is probably the term used back home. It's quite well known, or Django Reinhardt is really sort of part of public culture, I think much more than in Australia, partly because in the late 70s, early 80s, you had the band called Hot Club de Norvège, which is a spin of Django's band. Django's band was Hot Club de France, right? And then so it's just a spin of that. So you had this Norwegian band, and they had a big hit actually with a folk singer in the, I think, like, I don't know, late 70s, early 80s, which is basically a Gypsy Jazz tune, and the lyrics is about Django Reinhardt. So it's always sort of been with me. And when I was young, played in rock bands and stuff. And this is a bit of a geeky thing. All guitarists, I think, whether it's rock music or jazz or whatever, everyone likes Django, I think. So it's always been with me. Back then, extremely inaccessible style of music. And I should say, I'm an amateur musician myself. I'm not professionally trained or anything like that, and I can't read notes properly or anything like that. So I'm terrible. but what happened is that many years later on, when I lived in Sydney, a friend of my cousin-in-law, actually, who is also a hobby guitarist, he suggested, let's go and check out this gig in Sydney, and it was Lulu Reinhardt, who is the grandnephew of Django. So he played, and that sort of brought me back into that music. Like, oh wow, great, and by that time, suddenly you have YouTube and internet. So I came home and I just started Googling a little bit around Gypsy Jazz, and then bang, you have endless of videos, of interviews, performances, a lot of instructional videos, which is great for lazy guitarists like me who can't read notes and learn to play this in the proper way. And by the way, I mean, this music is also, Roma people, they're illiterate, and both often in a literal sense of writing, but also in reading, but also musically, right? They just play, Yeah. So then suddenly, like, oh, okay, how to play, because the chord shapes, a lot of the soloing, all of that is not really how you would play conventionally, whether it's rock or jazz or classical guitar or whatever. I have a bit of classical training actually when I was younger, but anyway. So suddenly that became accessible in a way it hasn't been before. So that's
Would you
2000. Sorry.
Sorry to interrupt. Would you say if it was still as inaccessible as it was, you would be pursuing it today?
It's really difficult to know. I think I always listen to Django actually. So I'm sure it's hard to know because it's hypothetical, but I would definitely be sort of listening to the music. If I would, I think it'll be hard to know how to get involved playing it if you don't have sort of obvious ways of connecting with the music and learning how to play it. And I think, and I can give you some resources and things like this anyway, but there's no doubt in my mind that the last decade, a bit more maybe, internet has been an enormous important sort of reason for the proliferation of this genre. Gypsy Jazz has a renaissance now, and internet is, and it's not just sort of, the seeing, say, some, a lead guitarist explaining how you play songs or how to play arpeggios or whatever. The downstroke technique is really important in Gypsy Jazz from a guitarist perspective. And all that stuff, you can get that on YouTube, but it's also community, right? So now I know a lot of guitarists and players around the world because of internet. Facebook groups, things like this. There's a community of practitioners. So yeah, so it's completely sort of brought that out.
I get you. Before you mentioned that in Norway they kind of avoid the term. What's the reasoning behind that?
I don't think they avoid the term, but it's more that. So that I was probably speaking a bit there. But I think just the terms. Sometimes people just say Django jazz or Django music or string swing.
Right.
In English, the term has become Gypsy Jazz. In French, it's jazz manouche.
Yeah.
But this is a topic in itself, and I don't know if you want to go into it. But in English language, to say gypsy can be sensitive. It can be thought of as a bit derogatory. But within this music, it tends not to be. It's a term used. I had the great honor of. I actually happened to talk to both Lulu Reinhardt, the grandnephew of Django, but also David Reinhardt, who's the grandson, about this. Actually, I was in France at the Django festival once. David Reinhardt said, he said something quite interesting. He basically said, no problem. Only non-gypsy people worry about this. He said, sort of. Right. So they actually used the term themselves a fair bit. And in French, I don't speak French, but my understanding is that in French, the term jazz manouche, manouche means gypsy, but it has much more. It's very specific to the music and not the ethnic group as such. So it doesn't have any sort of negative connotation in French. In English, gypsy can sound, like outside the context of the music, it can be a problematic term.
Right. I also read during my research on that note that many gypsy jazz musicians refuse to describe their music as being gypsy jazz out of fear of kind of being pigeonholed into that genre. And they're like concerned that embracing that genre label might affect their audience reception and their opportunities for collaboration.
That's right.
As a non-Romani, would you share those fears? And where do you believe those fears come from?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes. Okay. So there is a big literature around this too. I haven't yet quite dived into the academic literature on this actually, but I've read some pieces. But yeah. Okay. So I think it's hard to say it's one thing. Some people probably avoid the term a little bit, partly for some of the reasons I kind of hinted at, is that it is kind of a bit of a problematic term, right? Partly because, especially in English, the label gypsy generally. But I think in terms of music, it's when you say gypsy jazz, it comes with sort of a very sort of essentialist assumption that there's something inherently about gypsy people and this music. And but this is an interesting thing. Is so if you listen to Django, if you're going to try and pinpoint exactly what is it about this music that is gypsy, it's actually really difficult to say. It's swing jazz in a way, right? It's sometimes you have. I don't know if you are familiar with, for example, the rhythm technique for the guitar, like la pompe is sort of the rhythm you play.
I did read about it, yeah.
Yeah, and again, you can dive into this topic, and sometimes I guess this sort of that's typical gypsy jazz, right? But then, if you go back to the stars of music back in the 1930s, when Django lived in Paris, there are a lot of non-gypsy kind of music where this will be the technique used, and are you familiar with Oscar Aleman? So he was an Argentinian contemporary of Django. He lived in Paris at the time. He would be using similar techniques. And we're not talking about Argentinian jazz, this gypsy jazz, but not Argentinian jazz. So I think, that's probably a reason why some people avoid the term gypsy, because it's, it's really, what is it about it that is gypsy? Django Reinhardt was Romani, but musically speaking. Yeah, sorry.
If you were to try and pinpoint what makes the genre like Romani in nature, what would your
Yes.
opinion on that be?
Okay, so this maybe I don't know if you've seen this, but the one quite well-known guitarist in this genre who's also very much a teacher, right? So he's one of, some of these guitarists sort of become known as teaching this style, right? So one of them is Dennis Chang. He's Canadian.
I have seen the name in my research.
Yeah, okay. And he has a great blog, by the way, where he talks about a lot of these issues, right? Quite well worth reading. And he knows a lot of the Roma players. And I should say this, it's not just Roma, it's also Sinti, especially in the Netherlands. A lot of them are Sinti. And part of the reason why sometimes, so this is the thing, right? So you said Gypsy Jazz, but then why not say Roma music or jazz? But then that can be quite offensive towards Sinti people because they're not Romani. Anyway, so that's why sometimes Gypsy term is better to use. What I was going to say though is that so there's a video where he talks about all this sort of the Gypsy jazz and the origin, and he talks what we talk about now. He talks about sort of some of these, what do these terms mean? Can it really talk about Gypsy jazz and that kind of thing? And there's one thing he said which I can't quite agree with. Sort of, all right, so if we were to sort of, I'm an anthropologist, by the way, so we deconstruct things, and sort of we are, of course, aware of the dangers of sort of cultural essentialism, and in this case, sort of racialized essentialism. This idea that there's something gypsy about it, right?
Right.
But one thing Dennis Chang said, which I think is, if there's one thing that maybe has something to do with Roma culture, is that, so if you go back to Django, a lot of this, musical performances within the Romani community, a lot of it is about busking. So it's busking music in a way, right? And part of busking is, of course, spectacle. It's about getting attention playing in the street, right? And if you listen to Django, there are quite a lot of the phrasings that he would use, which are kind of, which is about that in a way. It is it's fireworks. It's that sort of really over the top guitar playing. And so if there's one thing that I think you can kind of say is, I need to be careful, in a qualified way, I should say, right? That is a form of, this has something to do with Gypsy culture, Roma culture. It would be that, I think. So if I had a guitar, I could maybe try and demonstrate some of this. But there are some of the runs and things that Django have used, and which all contemporary players sort of emulate, and which it's kind of bravado. It's that sort of
like,
Hmm?
I guess maybe like passion or emotion.
Yes, I would say so. And of course, this is very sort of opaque. Like, what do we mean by that? I think that the playing style sometimes is on the edge. Again, it's very guitar dominated, right? I mean, you have, of course, violin and clarinet, sort of typical instruments, sometimes accordion and so forth, but guitar is kind of the main thing. And sometimes it would involve certain licks around there, which really are arpeggios. But there are also some triads and things like that Django would use quite often, where it's the passion is about playing it at the speed where there's a big danger of failing playing it, basically. You're pushing it to where you're playing kind of 10% beyond what you really can do, kind of thing, right? And of contemporary players, I mean, one player that comes up sometimes would be people like Joella Schmidt, for example. So he's well known to play in a very, very loud, punchy style. And yeah, I would be thinking about someone like him probably, who pulls that off really well.
So what was the name of the player again?
Joella Schmidt. So I can text it in the chat window. So
that'd be awesome, because I think I might have read someone's account of seeing him. I think it's like
Yeah, Joella Schmidt. So you know you have different sort of subgenres and all that kind of thing. So it's misspelt a bit, but so the Schmidt family is really interesting, by the way, in terms of contemporary plays. Joella Schmidt is a big one. Dorado Schmidt is another one. And then you can look at some of the younger generation. You have these young guys who play ridiculously fast, you know. So Amati Schmidt is one. Yeah, you know that play crazy fast, and again, it's that. I mean, it's a bit pubertal, you know. That sort of ooh, I can play fast, you know. And I guess yeah. So there's something about. But I mean, you know, of course, what I'm saying is kind of not quite true either, because like heavy metal guitar players, they also try and play faster than what they actually can all the time. So, and they're not Roma players necessarily.
in some ways, I've seen people describe what makes it, especially Romani, as kind of ineffable or indescribable. Would you think? Would you describe it in kind of a similar manner?
That's a good question too, isn't it? Yes. Okay. So you know, I'm in, I guess, a slightly unique sort of situation here, because you know, I'm as a hobby, I play Gypsy Jazz music, right? Whatever that might be. And as an anthropologist, I'm of course very well aware of sort of the problems of sort of using and diving into a form of ethnic essentialism, right? Which this is about in many ways. So that's a contradiction, of course. And I because it's a hobby of mine, I'm not really even bothered trying to solve that in a way. I guess I'm saying I haven't sort of intellectually speaking been really thinking this through, you know. Well, in a way, I think that's true in the sense that on one level, of course, it is kind of, you know, to try to pinpoint exactly what this is really is a bit of a chasing a horizon in a sense, right? So I mean, you know, Django, he was so influenced by Louis Armstrong. You know, this is North American 1930s swing jazz in so many ways. So in a way, it is really hard to sort of really try to somehow describe what this is about as a specific genre of music. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that's good. That's good. Kind of related to that too. I've been reading a bunch of ethnographic papers on it, and I see something mentioned a lot by gypsy jazz guitarists, that they believe you can tell the difference between a Romani and a non-Romani when they play the music.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you think there's a discernible difference there, or do you think it's a bit struggling to think of the word? I guess, for lack of a better term, I guess sensational.
Yeah, look, I mean, you know, that's basically rubbish. You know, it's like, no, you can't. Of course, you can't do that. You know, it's really true that, I mean, I've been, you know, I play in a band. I've gone to festivals. You know, I know a lot of people in this genre, and sometimes this kind of view is coming up. And I think maybe there are a few people who's been writing some of these things. There's one female musicologist in the States. I've forgotten her name. She's written some really good.
I can't remember the first name, but I think it's Lee or Lai.
Yeah. Yes.
Like that.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's written a lot about it.
Yeah, and the great papers, and you know, she's right. Basically, I think about it. You know, she has some good insights, I think. And yeah. Look, I think that of course you can't, if you do kind of a blind test. This is a very interesting concept. Again, I would refer back to Dennis Chang. Look, that you can tell the difference between a Roma player and a non-Roma player. No, you can't. That being said, there are really interesting differences in style within the genre. So, for example, La Pomp rhythm guitar playing. You have, so say in Dutch or in the Netherlands, you know, you have the way that the guitar rhythm is being played tends to be slightly different from what you will have in Paris, for example. and you have all this. So, for example, one of my favorite players is actually Argentinian, Gonzalo Bergara. So he's Argentinian but kind of American. Like his band is based in the States, and
Right.
if you check him out, you can really hear the guitar playing. The La Pompe is really, really muted and sharp and very, very short. It's like a stab. It's a really, really sort of distinct kind of play. So you can hear sometimes. I do actually believe that someone like Dennis Chang, for example, and he talks about this in one of his videos. He would be able to sort of have probably with some level of accuracies, you can sort of say, listening to your playing, you've probably been playing a lot in Paris, as opposed to eastern parts of France. So I think that's true, that you have some sort of regional differences in style of play, but that you could attribute that to ethnicity.
Right.
I don't think you can. No. And you know what? If anything, in my personal view is that the person in the world today who is by a mile closest to Django Reinhardt in emulating the playing style is Duva Duvanjeski, who's an Israeli Jewish player. He is unbelievably close to both the playing style in terms of the harmonies, in terms of all kinds of phrasings he's using, but the tone as well. It's incredible, and I think you would, if you for example listen to him and compare him to say Stockel Rosenberg, who is by many considered to be probably the best guitar player in this genre in the world, who is Roma. No, he's not. He's Sinti actually, but in the Netherlands. You probably will hear it that like Duvet is so close to Django. It's crazy. So there are definitely different sort of styles, but no, the most authentic player, as I'm concerned, is actually not a Roma player. It's Duvet,
Right.
who's Israeli.
After the interview, I might send you an email or something, because I do want to identify some of the names of these players you've mentioned, but I'll do that afterwards, just to save time.
Sorry, I think we dropped out just then. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, my internet connection is having issues apparently. What was the last thing you heard me say? Sorry.
You said something about I think I might follow up.
Right. Yeah. After the interview, I might follow up on that and get some of the names of the specific artists you mentioned via email or something, because I'm interested in checking them out. Let me just give it a look. So one Romani guitarist who believes there is an ethnic difference there said the following. He says that he thinks a non-Manouche musician who really wants to play in this style has to be a musician who learns the way Manouches learned. That's to say, by looking, listening, exchanging with the musicians, and not by way of a piece of sheet music. It's more based on listening, on the auditive, on imitation, and seeing how the other does it. But we don't give precise things saying it's this or that name or this or that note. To do so makes the music less feelingful, heartful, and less genuine. Would you agree with that sentiment or disagree with it, and why?
Okay, that's a great question. It's definitely, those views are definitely out there, right?
It is a hard question, I know.
Yeah, it is, because it is definitely true that there is a distinct difference in how many Roma players and Sinti players learn to play. It is. So, for example, I've been to I don't know if you probably heard of Samoa, the Samoa Festival, south of France, south of Paris, which is a huge Django festival. It's crazy good to go there. It's like, all the top players are there, and for Django nerds, it's just it's like Django worship for several days, and there are many Roma players there, and Sinti players, and of course a Gaggio player, like non-Roma players, it's definitely true that you have different learning styles. That's for sure. Does that learning style translate into actual different styles of playing? And it's a bit hard for me to answer to, because again, as I said, like I can't really read sheet music myself, so I can't kind of make that comparison in that sense.
Right. When you say you don't read sheet
Yes.
music, does that mean you've learned the genre basically by imitating as well?
Pretty much, yeah.
I see. That's interesting.
Yes. So I don't have a comparison really. I mean, partly, right? So I can read chord charts poorly, like I'm semi-literate. It's challenged with if it jam and stuff, because like if someone comes with a new song, and it depends on the song. If it's relatively straightforward chords, it's fine. But if it's some sort of complexity in chord shapes or just the whole song as such, then I struggle to follow it. But if I then go back home and listen to it, and then with the chord, then I can kind of work it out.
Right.
I read tablature. That's sort of the cheap, lazy way of guitarists who never bother to learn to read music properly, right? So I can do that sometimes, and then YouTube videos sometimes you can see. So I can read tabs. But I started to learn when I played classic guitar when I was a teenager, but then I stopped and I forgot how to do it. So I'm not really answering your question, do I? Okay, I will say this: is that what, like if you want to press me on that, like, can we really, do I kind of have evidence from my experience or in my head that there are differences between, say, someone who's learned sheet music and play this music and others? I don't have evidence to sort of say that there's a difference. At the same time, I'm kind of left wondering though whether, I mean, there are after all two really different ways of learning how to play this music. And you can't intuitively, we kind of imagine that might translate into some slight differences. I mean, I know
I guess
sometimes
you can't
that
really know for certain though.
pardon?
I guess you can't really know for certain though.
No, yeah. So I would, I'm not taking the view that we can be sure that there's this difference, and I would, although I know that it's commonly claimed, that you must learn it this way and that kind of thing. How much that really matter? I think that's a much more of an open question.
I spoke with another guitarist. He's part of the Belko Jazz Band. I'm not sure if he's usually part of it though, if he was just filling in for a night. But he said that
Oh yeah,
his name's Lachlan Coventry. He said
yeah.
he said he also learnt kind of by just listening along and stuff. And as such, he doesn't use some of the techniques often used in the genre. You yourself, do you tend to use any? I've noticed that Django kind of injured his hand and altered the way he played as a result. Practicing some techniques such as using the thumb when playing chords or using the same finger to depress two strings.
Yeah.
Do you yourself use those techniques when playing?
A bit, yes. I guess the main thing is it so again, yeah, Lachlan. I mean, Lachlan is a great guitar player, and
Yeah, it's a great performance to watch.
Yeah, and I mean, he's way better than me. But I am probably a bit more in the gypsy jazz genre than him is in terms of playing the music, probably. Yes, so I do use some of these techniques, but the main thing would be the downstroke technique for the right hand, actually.
Yeah, I've got like rest stroke or rest picking written down.
Yes, that's right. So I use that quite a bit. I'm not claiming I'm good at it. It's such a sort of, to master that really well is difficult. But I do that, and it has a lot to do with projection, actually, because you're playing acoustically, and I mean, now we amp up and things like that. But again, back in the 20s and 30s, often you play without amps, and the whole thing was about how do you play high, on the high volume, and then you have the rest stroke technique. But then again, like, is that gypsy? Well, actually, the rest stroke technique's been around for a long time, hundreds of years in different kinds of string instruments, right? So, but I do that, and you kind of have a floating. The right hand has kind of this floating wrist, and I remember adjusting from playing electric guitar. I mean, I don't have the guitar in front of me, but like, to adjust that, it's really weird and counterintuitive. It takes quite a while to get your head around that, but you kind of have the, rather than playing close to the fretboard like this, you pick like that, and it makes you play faster actually when you learn it a bit, and but again, it's about volume, and that's rhythm playing and solo playing. The two finger thing, a little bit. Actually, you know what? I for a period, I really did it because I dislocated my pinky playing basketball.
Oh,
So
you
for
kind
a
of
while,
force, you kind of force to do it as well.
yeah, I had to actually just sort of learn to really play with the two fingers, and then you can, I mean, Django could use the ring finger and the pinky as a bit as kind of a lump, as kind for some chord shapes. So kind of had the third finger, and then the thumb as well. I use the thumb all the time, and some of the solo runs I sometimes do actually play the two finger thing, because it's weird. It's like, once you learn how to play some of these arpeggios the way Django played them, they are really economical, and therefore you can play them really fast. So sometimes I do.
Right. Do you ever? I've also read that some people kind of use their thumb when they play chords as well. I think that's a bit of an extreme step to take. But do you ever do that yourself?
Use the thumb all the time. I actually don't think. Well, it depends where you're coming from. So I played in rock bands when I was a teenager, right? And a lot of rock guitarists will play with their thumb. Like, I guess it depends on the genre, but I mean, Jimi Hendrix did this all the time.
Did he play with his thumb?
Yeah, like for chord shapes to use your oh yeah, all the time. You can just go on YouTube and look at Jimi Hendrix. Yeah, Jimi Hendrix did that all the time. So and a lot, I think, especially.
Sorry, I'm kind of going on a tangent now because that's really interesting to me. But do you know why he did it?
I don't know, but one thing, I think this is maybe more in rock music, and especially, say, indie music, sort of, that came out in the 1990s. It's so common, and I maybe one thing. Jimi Hendrix is maybe not a good example of this, but many indie bands, part of the doing of it, I think, is stylistic, in the sense that, I mean, visually actually, because you can then, if you somehow, I don't know how this happened, somehow it was a cool thing to have your guitar hanging really down low. If you look at a lot of indie bands, they don't hold the guitar high up like that. It's really far down. And if you hold it far down, ergonomically, it's not going to work really well to then play. I mean, it works sort of better if you use your thumb. And so, but I think that Jimi Hendrix, definitely, he did this a lot. And if you go on YouTube, you will see it. If
yeah, I'll definitely look into it.
Yeah.
Now.
So for me, and like, then there wasn't an issue. I didn't adapt using the thumb because of Django. That was just how I learned to play the guitar, basically. So that was easy.
I've heard that some individuals do it simply because Django did it that way. What do you think of individuals who imitate him in that way?
Nerds. I mean, it's kind of nerd. I mean, some can go more extreme. Like, you have this is ridiculous thing to do. So, and look, I think few people do this they do it as a bit of a joke, right? And that is to tape your pinky and your ring finger.
I have read about that. Yeah.
Yeah, to emulate the injured finger, right? Look, I mean, it's I think it's kind of silly, but I think most people who do it also kind of, There might be some who do that in a very serious way, but I think a lot of people do kind of just a bit for fun.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't want to speculate, but do you think maybe the people who are joking when they do that are only like half joking and kind of doing it out of a sort of reverence for Django?
Possible, yeah. Yeah.
When I know some of the techniques Django used, as you said before, would be used to kind of augment the volume and make it louder. Do you, when you play, do anything similar?
I try to, and a lot of this came out, I think, not sort of that intentional actually, but so in my band, and again, we call it Gypsy Jazz project, and again, we use the term. We talked about this. We use the term Gypsy Jazz, and again, it's just because that's the term that's sort of the term used, and that's how it's known, and so we use that name. But what we've done quite a bit, not so much now, but before COVID, we were busking a fair bit. Not, I mean, we're all like salaried people, so it's not for the money, but it's just, it's a way to just learn to play in a way, right? And so, for example, we played a lot at the Saturday markets up in Watson.
Right.
And what is good about busking is that, again, and this is the thing, they don't allow amps, which I think is reasonable. But that means you have to play to be heard, right? And it forces you to then try and project acoustically. And I think it's a great skill to try and approximate, to learn to. This is acoustic music, and to not be dependent on amps too much and things like that. I mean, so much that I sometimes, once we played a gig at Gang Gang, so I played with Cameron Jones from Sydney, who happens to be the director of the Australian Oz Manouche Festival, the Django Festival in Australia. So once we played, in Brisbane in November, sorry. Yeah, we're having a Gypsy Jazz Festival. But anyway, so we played acoustic, just no amps.
In like a busy setting.
Yeah, in a cafe, yes. It's really damn difficult, but it's like resisting that temptation of amping up, I think, is great. And but Alduve that I mentioned before, he does this quite a bit, where just playing without amps. Dennis Chang too. There are some YouTube clips where we play maybe more in a church or something like that. I mean, the acoustics will be good for this, right? Where you have an attentive audience. I think if you're in a noisy bar, it's going to be really difficult. But if you have an attentive audience, that's a bit of a thing. Again, back to that purist, authentic sort of thing about Django. Trying to play just no amps.
I get you. My group mate messaged me and told me he can't make it, but he does want me to ask you, how do you think the genre has kind of changed over time due to modern music conventions?
Oh, okay. It's changed in so many ways. So the style of playing in itself has actually changed. So and here this is a weird one. So for example, Django, because of his hand, he ends up playing. This is partly why he ends up playing a lot of 6/9 chords. So either major or minor 6/9 chords. If I had a guitar in front of me, I could show you. And the interesting thing is that if you go back to Django's records and if you listen to them, and also if you see some very, very few video clips of Django, so he would play that because of his hand. So then this has been then copied, right? So everyone plays these minor 6 chord, minor 6 or minor 6/9 or major 6/9 chords all the time. But Django's band, if you look at the rhythm guitar, so Django's brother, for example, he would typically play a straight major or minor chord. So it's sort of this sort of over eagerness about Django, which has actually people kind of they actually end up playing things that the rhythm section for Django didn't actually play. So it has actually changed some of the tonal quality of and the harmonics of songs compared to what Django would have played.
Right. So if you were to sorry to interrupt. So if you were to like put on an original Django recording and then put on, I don't know, something a band played in a bar, you think it would sound very different?
Yeah, there is a slight difference. And again, what you can maybe try and do, and I think you will kind of hear it, is again, so if you listen to something from Django, and then if you listen to maybe the same song, say performed by someone like Stockler Rosenberg, who's a contemporary player, or Adrien Monniard, who's one of the best French players. So Adrien Monniard, by the way, he's not Roma, but he's one of the big players, right? And then you can then maybe also listen to, say, Duved, who I mentioned before, who to my ear is a very sort of back to Django kind of player, right? It sounds different. It's a different sort of it's a different feel to the playing. And I'm trying to think more specifically and sort of technically what the difference might be. I don't have this in front of me now, but so Dennis Chang, he runs a Sound Slice. This is a website anyway. So he has this web portal where you can buy instructional videos and things like that. And I have one with Duved, where he goes through a lot of the things and he actually shows some of the differences and things like that. So you can get really sort of technical into some of these differences.
Right.
So that's a huge difference, right? The other difference I would say would be, again, largely facilitated by internet and YouTube and Facebook and social media and everything else, is just that the style has been sort of democratized and made accessible globally in a way that is completely unprecedented. This also includes instrumentation. So, some years back, so to get hold of a typical guitar that Django would play. So, he played a Selma Macaferi guitar.
Yeah, I was about to ask about that as well. Yeah.
And back in the day, it would be really hard to get hold of them. But now it's like there are so many different companies around the world making these guitars. So everything from big companies to more sort of niche luthiers who build guitars, and a big range. So you still have the high end, really expensive, beautiful handmade guitars, and then you have everything down to much cheaper guitars made in Asia, many in China, but also Japan. Japan makes some really good ones, by the way. They have some really high-end ones as well. So suddenly now you can in Canberra, you can go to Better Music and you can pick up an Altamira guitar. I play an Altamira guitar, which is probably one of the better Asian-made guitars, and you can pick them up from the lowest price might be. I can't remember exactly now, maybe $1,200, $1,500 and up. I mean, you can spend $50,000 if you want to, but so all of that, suddenly everything is available in a way that it wasn't before.
Getcha. I was of the opinion it was really expensive because I think I was, I'm not sure what year the article was published, but it was like late, like I think it was like 2007 or something, and someone said that it was a really kind of expensive style of guitar to buy. Although then when I asked people if their version of this guitar was actually expensive, they're like, "No, I got it for pretty damn cheap. I could have spent more if I wanted to, but my one costs like $600."
Yeah, the cheapest will be like 600, and that will be not very good though, I have to say. But then the first guitar I bought was like I think 800 or something like that. I still have it. Then I bought secondhand an Altamira, which new will cost 2,600, I think. I'm just going to send you a link. So I mean, there are so many websites and this kind of thing. One of the main ones is this one, Django Books. This is a guy out of Seattle. This guy, Michael Horowitz, I think he did his PhD in musicology, writing about the rhythm guitar playing in Gypsy Jazz. So a whole PhD just on how to play rhythm. He is one of maybe the biggest websites for selling guitars internationally. And here you can sort of see the guitars. I mean, the price range will be from, I'm just looking at it now. It's like the Saga Gitan guitars will be, or the Sagano one will be the cheapest one probably. That's what I had. Oh yeah, US dollars 550, and you can some of the French ones there will be Dupont guitars.
Yes, he was
you know,
quite a
so say
range of
4,000 up
prices.
to 10,000, and it can go further. So I remember having a chat to John Delaney. So John Delaney is one of Australia, or was one of Australia's best guitar players, like Gypsy Jazz guitar players. He sadly passed away from cancer like a year ago,
Mhm.
but he updated his guitar 2 or 3, 4 years ago to Dupont, and I think I talked to him about it. I think it costs $7,000, 8,000. But you know, he's a professional musician, amazing guitar player, and
When you
my
say,
my
sorry, keep going, keep going.
uh so Bruce, who I play with in my band, so he has a Spanish built Gypsy Jazz guitar that he bought in France, and I think that cost around 4,000. So again, you know, then you have sort of, there's a bit of sort of, you know, who plays Gypsy Jazz guitar? A lot of old men, you know. So then, and some of them have a bit of money to spend, so they spend a lot of money. I mean, you know, sometimes they don't have to spend that money, but they do it because they want to.
Right.
Yeah.
What kind of, what do you think makes people want to spend so much money on this very specific kind of guitar when
Mm,
arguably you could probably achieve,
mm.
you probably do it well enough on just a standard acoustic one, right?
I think it's a combination of two things. I do think there is a little bit of sort of actual issues around quality. So you know, again, I mentioned my bandmate Bruce. Like his guitar sounds really good, and it sounds better than mine, and it is, there's something to do with the quality of the guitar. So it's not just all, you know, silliness in a way, right? But so there's a bit of quality that, you know, you spend, if you invest more money, and I can understand professional guitar players in this genre spending up to say $6, $7, $8,000 on a guitar. It's
Yeah.
not just crazy. There's something about the quality of the instrument that is, and I think playability is one thing, but tone, you know, getting a really well balanced, full, rich tone that projects well on low and high volume, to get all of that right. It's, you know, yeah. So it's partly, there's some objective criteria here, I think, about the quality of the instrument.
I get you.
At the same time, some people will also be, you know, I mean, if they can afford it, you know, and then, yeah, it's kind of geekiness basically, where, you know, I mean, similar to people can spend, you know, people are into cars, right? They can spend endless amount of money on their car, right? And
Mhm.
yeah, so it's you know, in a kind of a, on one level, it's just silly. It doesn't actually improve anything, and might
Understood.
actually make it worse because they invest their time into the gear rather than spending time practicing, right? So, you know,
Mhm.
but you know, it's just hobby.
I see. Do you, real quick, I just want to check,
Mm.
do you have a specific time this needs to be wrapped up by?
Not really. I should probably get going in within half an hour, but
Okay.
it's not a strict time.
I've pretty much gone through my entire list
Mm,
almost, or you've addressed them all. But
mm,
another thing I found interesting was when I was
mm,
discussing um, with Lachlan about
mm,
how he doesn't use some techniques. He said it's partially because of him being self-taught. He didn't realize they were like a thing, but also because as the genre
mm,
increased in popularity, there was an
mm,
increased importance of technical prowess, which kind of took the fun
mm.
out of the genre for him. Have you experienced any similar feelings?
Oh, that's really interesting. No, I don't think so, actually, and I think, um, hmm, I'm thinking. So I guess I commented this in a very different way than maybe Lachlan, because I mean, again, let's be honest, like Lachlan is he's a professional guitarist, right? And for me, it was like there was a level of adjustment, right? In the sense that, to be honest, like it was like learning a new alphabet.
Mhm.
You know, like I learned to play guitar for, you know, sort of crappy rock band, you know, not very good, and uh, and then learning the chords, learning and especially the, actually, I mean, the right hand is in many ways much more the thing here than the left hand. It's getting your head around how to play the rhythm, and make that sound reasonably okay. The soloing, all that kind of stuff, and then the chord shapes, etc. The arpeggios is so different from what you would do, say, if you play sort of conventional rock music. So there was a really sort of readjustment. But for me, this was a sort of starting just having the guitar at home. I lived in Sydney, pretty busy having a family. And for me, this has been a very sort of step-by-step slow thing, you know. I've just sort of been grinding through it, I guess, slowly. Maybe that's why, because like for me, it's always been, I never really had that sort of time to practice a lot anyway. So it's sort of been, you know, you have 10 minutes here, you have half an hour there, and you know, a few times a week kind of thing, and you just sort of slowly build. So that's just the way it's been. Really loving the music. You know, I mean, this is very sort of geeky and nerdy. You just sort of, it's a rabbit hole. You know, you just dive in and you kind of just, you know, you just stay in it, and you're loving it.
Yeah, it's very much like a labor of love sort of thing.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yes, absolutely.
One other thing, I guess, how has your perception of the genre kind of changed? How do you have your feelings towards the genre kind of changed at all as you've played it for longer and longer?
I don't think so. You know, I come into this as a hobby guitarist. It's a hobby. It's just something you like to do. Sometimes I'm asking myself, why do I love this so much? You know, like what is it about it that is such a great thing? So this is something I think is sort of still my impression, and I don't think it's changed. There's something about that. I think that it is acoustic. That is kind of minimalism. You know, like we don't have drums. You know, like it's sort of the rhythm guitar is also the drummer in a way, and there's something appealing about that. It is sort of the minimalism about it, right? And but one thing about Gypsy Jazz, I think, is that this is a bit subjective, but I would say, relatively speaking, it seems to me to be a quite open and welcoming kind of genre, in the sense that, you know, you always have hierarchical sort of things in music, where, especially between more experienced professional musicians and less experienced, and you have that, of course, in Gypsy Jazz too, in, say, jam situations and things like that. But you know, like there's something about that. It is a fairly sort of open community in a way of people. But that doesn't really answer your question. That's just sort of the appeal about it, I guess. I think. I mean, the only thing I guess I'm noticing is just that it seems to be a style of music that is growing.
Right.
You know, you have there are more people playing this now than what it was 10 years ago. You know, and slowly you learn, you get to know about some people, and you know, in my academic work, which has nothing to do with this music, by the way, when I've been fieldwork in Thailand, suddenly I then get to know about some of the Thai musicians who play this stuff in Bangkok, and you meet up, and you know, it's sort of, you know, it's incredible.
Yeah. Why do you? This is completely kind of unrelated to that, but why do you believe so many Romani people identify with this genre of music?
Oh, okay. So yeah, and this is super interesting, right? I think, I mean, it's Django, I think, because, you know, Django is within the Romani community of people who become truly famous internationally outside the Romani community. There aren't that many. Django is one of them, right? So I think for a lot of Roma and Sinti players, there's something about that Django became sort of, you know, he's one of the sort of the big respected European jazz guitarists, you know, and so I think that's a big thing. Something to be proud of, you know.
Yeah, you think it's kind of just because this sort of founding figurehead was Romani?
Yes,
That's why so many
yes, I
people
think
choose
so.
to identify with it.
I think so. And there are some, and I think this may have come up in some of the literature you've been reading too. But back to this thing about ethnic essentialism, it is, this happens a lot amongst them, right? So you have these sort of weird situations where I had this experience in Venice once, actually. So I was in Venice, part of an exchange thing, and then in the evenings, so I worked out. So there happened to be an American Italian gypsy jazz player who's a painter who lives in Venice. So I met up with him a few times, and we played together in the evenings, like after work. And from time to time, there would be Roma buskers, accordion players, who would be around, and sometimes we would be playing with them. And and then you have this sort of comical situation where one of them is sort of, oh, I want to teach you a nice Roma tune, like a real folk song kind of thing, and then the tune is all of me,
Is
So,
what, sorry?
but the tune all of me.
I'm not too familiar with it.
Oh, okay, but it's a traditional jazz standard from North America.
Right,
It's
right.
not it's not a gypsy tune whatsoever, right? It's mainstream conventional American jazz,
It's like
and,
a jazz standard.
yeah, it's a jazz standard, right? And this is a kind of a thing where they will kind of insist this is our music, That's,
Right.
yeah. So
That is,
yeah,
like
it's kind of funny.
something I read. The first individual to kind of identify a gypsy school of jazz, at least as far as a couple scholars are aware, is a French critic.
Mm.
He wrote that the term gypsy jazz doesn't signify the integration of so-called gypsy music with jazz. Instead, he acknowledges that Reinhardt
Mm.
was less an extraordinary gypsy guitarist than he was a sort of quintessential jazz musician. And he concludes that what defines gypsy jazz is above all the race of its practitioners. What are your
Mm.
thoughts on taking such a race-based approach to defining the genre?
Yes, I mean this is one of those big, I guess, questions. It's a bit controversial in some ways, right? Because this is quite true. Is that, I mean, when Django played, he didn't say gypsy jazz, right? Or jazz manouche
Yeah,
in
I've read
French.
that he didn't have any conception of the term, really.
No. So this is, this is a good example of the British historian Eric Hobsbawm, who has written this beautiful book called The Invention of Tradition. Right? It doesn't talk about this music, of course, but gypsy jazz is that in a way. It is very much kind of, on one level, it's a manufactured kind of thing. It is this idea that somehow this is a unique style that is somehow essentially about gypsy people, or that it has sort of emanates from gypsy culture, or something about it. It can be so racialized, like it's almost like, again, what you said before, this idea that you can hear if it's a gypsy person playing as opposed to a non-gypsy, and so forth, right? So that is of course problematic, right? In the sense that it is a highly essentialized way of thinking about genre music. So I'm fully aware. Yes, sorry.
I was just going to say, like, you have kind of answered the question already, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on that quote specifically. Keep going. Like, you're doing good.
Yeah. So like it's gypsy jazz, the way it sort of has evolved. It is. Yeah. So it is. Of course, we're dealing with ethnic and racial essentialism. And this is perhaps one of the reasons why I also, use the term gypsy jazz, is that, in a way, what's interesting here is that amongst Roma, and so the Roma and Sinti groups will be the main ones playing this style of music, and for them, many of them, this is a source of some level of pride and honor. And when they kind of end up using these terms, I kind of think that, yes, although this is kind of, again, Django never said gypsy jazz, for example, and so forth. I think it is sort of an important form of recognition too, that this term is actually quite important for identity of a lot of Roma and Sinti people. And again, this identification with Django as sort of the father of this music. So on that level, it becomes a form of respect to use the term in a way, right? In the sense that by, if we sort of start to deconstruct this and sort of say, oh, well, no, but come on, this is not really Gypsy music. At least let them hold on to something. It's like,
when you say, just to clarify, when you say it's sort of respect, do you think non-Romani using the term is kind of showing a respect for the?
It can be in certain contexts.
Yeah.
It can also not be. Okay, this is slippery. Okay, so the use of labels and so forth. This is so context based. So what I meant to say is that it's not so much that non-Romani using the term in and of itself, but if we start to say too much that, hey, you can't talk about Gypsy jazz, we need to also at the same time be mindful of the fact that this has become a really important source of identity formation for a lot of Sinti and Roma players.
Right.
Does that make sense? So again, it's not so much that using the term in itself is a form of respect, but it is attempting to relativize or deconstruct the term can in some ways potentially work a bit against an important source of identity for Roma players and then Sinti players.
Now I just have a random smattering of questions which I haven't asked. When did you did kind of say, you didn't give a specific age or anything, but when did you start learning it?
Okay, so you mean Gypsy jazz, not guitar as such, not the Gypsy jazz? Yes.
I mean, I'm interested in both, actually.
Oh, okay, so guitar generally, I think I was 10 or something like that. I started with the David Bowie songbook, I remember. I'm a big David Bowie fan. And,
Right.
So, pop rock kind of thing, Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, all that kind of stuff. And
were you a child of the 70s? Were you like
I am so I'm born in the mid-70s, 75.
Yeah.
So I would have been in the mid-80s, 85, 6, 87 is probably when I would have been picking up the guitar. And then starting playing in rock bands in my teens. And I would be playing. I came to Australia when I was like in my early 20s, and it's probably around then I kind of started. I stopped playing because I didn't have a guitar and that kind of thing.
So were you?
And then,
sorry to interrupt. Were you playing electric guitar or acoustic to start with?
At the very beginning, it was acoustic, and then it became electric.
Right.
So in my teens, playing in rock bands, and then stopping that, and then later on in Sydney, hold on, when was this? I think maybe around 2010.
So when you started learning Gypsy jazz?
Yes.
Right.
And again, as I said before, it was that what was really the pivot point for me was going and see Lula Reinhardt in Sydney playing, and he's Roma himself and playing. I mean, he's Django's grandnephew. And I was like, oh, yeah, this is great. And then again, realizing then that, I can go on YouTube and work out how they play this stuff. Mm-hmm. That was sort of so then I borrowed an acoustic guitar from a friend for a little while, and then I went to Gladesville Guitar Factory in Sydney, and I bought a Gypsy Jazz guitar a bit later on. And then at that time, not playing with anyone, but then I started to sort of seek out the community. So I remember Nigel Date and Cameron Jones, who took place in Sydney, they were playing on a weekly basis in Bondi, and I would go and check them out and see them and started chatting to them a bit and that kind of thing. Later on, moved to Canberra in 2012, and took me a long time to find people. So 3-4 years in, then I, by coincidence, bumped into a guy named Bruce Rose, and and he played it too. And then we started the band, and we still play together. So then, it's just gradually you get into, and you find people, and that's how it sort of has evolved.
I get you. So your band kind of came about by chance, is what you're saying? It was just a chance encounter?
Yeah, it was chance encounter. So my wife attended a party at another academic who used to be at School of Art at ANU, because my wife is into textiles, she's a textile designer.
Mhm.
And we were there, and then I ended up chatting to this guy who was there. And oh, you play guitar? Oh, I play guitar too. And then, okay, oh, I'm really into Django. Oh, so am I. And then it turns out we both, trying to do the same thing. The next day we caught up, we started playing a bit together, and after that we got the band together.
Right.
So yeah, so we've been playing for a few years now, and that really helped with sort of just getting into really playing the music.
Yeah. So your first exposure was what was his name? Lulu Reinhardt, correct?
In Sydney, yeah. So in terms of really getting to play the music, I've been exposed to it before. Like I listened to Django, and I remember as a teenager, I must have been 18, probably 19, maybe. This is interesting. In Norway, Jon Larsen, who's the lead guitarist in Hot Club de Norvège, is quite key actually in this music, because he not only are they a great band, but he started to record a lot of the Roma players. So, for example, is this in the 80s or maybe 90s now? So, for example, the first album of Stockel Rosenberg, Seresta, it's an amazing album, was recorded by Jon Larsen in Oslo. And he's also the director of the oldest Django festival in the world. It's actually in Oslo. It's not in France. It's in Oslo. And I remember when I think I was 18, 19, attending the Django festival in Oslo. And you fall off your chair. So so he would get all these crazy good Roma players playing. And as a guitarist, it's like this is the thing. I think this is the kick out of Gypsy Jazz, because it's this thing that is acoustic guitars, and they play the ass of any other guitarist, whether it's heavy metal or more straight jazz or whatever. They play way faster, louder. It's I think that's the nerdy thrill of it all for a lot of the guitarists.
That kind of ties into what I was going to ask. I was going to ask how you felt when you first heard Gypsy Jazz, or just the genre, really.
Happy.
Happy.
There's something, yeah. There's something about the music that makes you feel happy. I think it's about, one thing is that it's acoustic, and it's kind of fast, and sort of there's this bravado around it. But there is something about I think it's because a lot of the soloing's around arpeggios. I think that's what does it. So it's very melodic. Well, part is about playing the melodic phrases, but it's also that soloing is around arpeggios, I think, and the sweetness that comes around the fact that it is acoustic. I actually think it's also because rhythmically it's not drums, so it's a very sort of gentle. It sounds kind of very, it works well as background music, right? And dinner parties or cocktail party or, winery. I mean, that's another thing I realized too. It suits everything. We played all kinds of situations. Inside Parliament House, even we played a gig inside the Parliament House. Yeah. That's a story in itself. So that for me, the sort of emotional, experiential dimension of this music is that it just puts a smile on my face. Listening to it, playing it as well, it's just such a sort of warm feeling around the music.
Very joyful.
Yeah, it's joyful. It just puts a smile on your face.
Right.
You can ask a psychologist about like why. I don't really know why.
I get you.
Yeah.
Personally, how would you define Gypsy Jazz if you had to?
Oh God. Okay, so it is. Look, it's swing music. Really, it's swing music, but where you have the acoustic guitar being the rhythmic backbone of the music,
right?
Playing La Pompe. To me, that's the heart of the music. Is that it's that sound. I mean, you have that swing, but the guitar, right, playing that La Pompe rhythm, that is the heart of the music, as far as I'm concerned. That's why this is controversial what I'm going to say. This is why I really don't like drums. Sometimes you have percussionists coming to jams. I hate it. It's like nothing to do with this music. Don't get me wrong. I like drums a lot in other styles of music. This music is like it kills what is the heart and the feel of the music, and it's the rhythm guitar. And then, of course, on top of that, you have these playful, very almost sort of cheeky, very melodic, but very fast, virtuosity sort of guitar play on top. And then, of course, with the violin and everything else. And yeah, oh, I'm rambling now, but yes, look, this is
good.
It's swing music, where it's all built around the acoustic guitar, the La Pompe rhythm, and then with this very sort of arpeggio-based guitar soloing play on top.
Do you think this sort of virtuosity is also a defining characteristic of it?
Oh yeah, yes, yeah. It is. And here sometimes it gets a bit controversial, right? Because you do get sometimes older players, quite rightfully, I think, who critique younger players for being, it ends up just being all about the speed and the technique, and the more lyrical quality sort of gets lost a bit. And that's of course quite true, I think, sometimes. And I think there are some sometimes if you go to a gig or something and you have like crazy good players, sometimes it gets a bit boring. It's a bit like with some heavy metal guitarists as well. Like it's just all about the speed and the technique, and then, but where's the kind of the melodic quality of it,
Right. By lyrical qualities, what did you mean exactly?
Oh yeah, that's yeah. What I don't know. I guess it's just about harmonic choices and phrasings. And I think sometimes that can include things like the use of negative space. In other words, what you don't play. So some guitarists who play really fast, it ends up just being all about how many notes they can cram into the song. But lyrical quality is the tension you can create by playing, and that is about variation in speed. It's about how you put together different kinds of melodic phrasings, how you use all kinds of different, I guess. I'm an amateur musician, so I don't have the sort of theoretical musical language to explain this.
I honestly don't have much either. But
yeah. So it can be the way in which you build melodic play and solo play through all kinds of different techniques. That can be use of chords within solos, different kinds of triads, all kinds of things like that. Creating variation within your play, I guess.
When you do play gigs, what sort of repertoire do you usually play? Do you play like Django songs or other Gypsy Jazz musicians, or do you play like jazz standards, or what do you choose to play?
Yeah, a combination of all of that. I mean, one thing that is important to keep in mind is that Django, he composed quite a lot of songs, but he also played a lot of jazz standards.
Yeah.
So we play a lot of that. So there will be quite a lot of Django tunes, but also tunes that Django played, traditional jazz standards, but sort of in Gypsy style, or the Essentialism Gypsy style, in the Django style, whatever you want to call it.
Keep going.
Yeah, so we play that, and then you have that, and then you have some. There are quite a few songs that are perhaps more contemporary in style. So they kind of become standard tunes in Gypsy Jazz, but that they weren't around when Django played.
Right.
And a lot of these are swing tunes. It's swing rhythm, it's swing jazz. But you have also other things too. So there are quite a few bossa orientated songs in Gypsy Jazz as well.
Like bossa nova.
Not quite bossa nova, but what do they say? I mean, there will be. It's not quite right to say it's bossa nova, but it's a bossa rhythm. So I mean, you can look it up. So for example, if you look at the song, it's called, say, Bossa Dorado. This is a song written by Dorado.
How do you spell it?
I can. So
Right.
Bossa Dorado is a really common tune to play in Gypsy Jazz. It's written by Joella Schmidt, who's a contemporary player, yeah. So that's there are quite a few songs like that are kind of more contemporary, and then we play sometimes some quirky things. Rhythmically, there are boleros. Django had there's one really famous Django song called Trouble and Bolero.
I get you.
Yeah, so you have there is some sort of you have some different styles. You have waltzes, of course. We actually don't play so many waltzes. One waltz we play sometimes is have you seen the movie Midnight Paris? No, Midnight in Paris. It's a Woody Allen movie. All right, it's a really famous movie by Woody Allen, and a lot of the music within the film, not all of it, but some of it is Gypsy Jazz, and one is written by Stefan Rembel, who's a French guitar player who's based in New York, and he's a great player. And he has a waltz called Bistro Fala, yeah, we play that sometimes. And again, it's one of those, I can assure it took me a lot of time to work out how to play the tune. It's sort of this over the top guitar waltz play. I'm gonna send a link to you so you can get the video.
Sure, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
When you play as well, do you tend to do much improvisation, or do you stick to kind of predetermined compositions?
A bit of both. I typically have some kind of template to work from, I guess. That does certain some songs, like the Bistro Fad I mentioned, that is like I'm not improvising. I'm playing, and it doesn't really have a solo. It's actually more of a sort of melodic line that's being played throughout. Quite a few songs most songs I will improvise, but I do have certain, there are certain. Again, a lot of this is around arpeggios. There are certain sort of arpeggios and all the voicings that I tend to just use, and you just sort of mash them together, basically the way you play. So yeah, so this kind of, yeah, you work from a bit of a template, but you do improvise. But some players do sort of, you have people who play note for note. It's very planned what they play. So you have that kind of thing happening with the genre quite a bit.
Right. And I'll leave you with kind of another big question. What impact do you think Gypsy Jazz has had on Romani identity?
Oh, that's a big one, and it's a bit hard for me to answer because I mean, this is one of those ironies too, that I have to confess I know I have very little engagement with the Roma community, and as far as I know, I don't think in Australia has a big Roma Gypsy jazz community. In other words, that you have Roma or Sinti people playing Gypsy jazz. This is much more the case in, say, France and the Netherlands. They are the two main countries for this, but also Germany, you have quite a few people and so forth. But so in a way, I'm the wrong person to ask, in the sense that I can't really speak on their behalf at all. But I do think that, again, it is a quite big thing in terms of a sense of pride, and it's one of those very Roma people are so stigmatized in so many different ways. Here you have one thing where there's this sort of big valorization of their culture, and in that sense, I think it is quite important to them. Yeah, so that will be my answer.
I get you. Is there anything else which you believe is kind of important to mention, or that you're eager to share, which you may not have covered?
Not really. I guess, like this topic can be explored in so many different ways, right? And one thing that's always struck me, this is beyond, I think, beyond what you're looking at, but there are two things that I kind of noticed, which is interesting to me while I've been playing this music. One has to do with gender, and like it's very male dominated. It's not unique to this music, by the way, but it's interesting sort of how and why is it that becomes, a lot of guys. Yeah.
I was gonna ask. I was considering asking because I didn't know it's a very male-dominated genre, although it's not too relevant to what I'm doing my assignment on. But it would be interesting to hear your take on kind of male.
I mean, I've been thinking this, but why is it that this is such a male thing? I guess guitar generally tend to be quite male dominated, so it might not be unique to or a reflection of the genre as such, but it's very male, and it tends to be older male. Although you do have a lot of younger guys too, so there's a bit of a range now, but why is it that the girls end up there do the violin and the flute and the sometimes maybe clarinet or something like that, but guitar, like in Australia, I talked to Cameron Jones about this, who's again sort of key guy in this in this music. I think we know of only 2 or 3 female guitarists who are actually sort of really into playing this music in Australia.
Right.
That's not many. That's very few.
And so what do you say that guy's name was?
Cameron Jones.
Cameron Jones.
So okay, so if you, I don't know how much time you have to do this particular, the scope of your assignment and things like that, but I mean, one thing you could do is to join the Facebook group Australian Gypsy Jazz. It's a bit quiet at the moment, actually. I think it's COVID and everything, but that's like, all the Django nerds are on there.
Yeah, I'll look into
so it. Yeah, and Cameron Jones is on there. So, and there are several, other people who are into his music. So Cameron, I mean, he's been in France a bit, and he's sort of had lessons from some of the players in the Netherlands. One of the guys who's been playing a fair bit would be Lola Meyer, who is from the Netherlands. And he was at the festival in Brisbane before COVID. I had the great luck and honor of, I was on stage once playing with him, just playing rhythm guitar, and did a lesson with him as well and things like that. And yeah, that's great.
Awesome.
So gender, one thing. The other thing, and this is a bit certainly beyond what you're looking at, but as an amateur musician, it's interesting to engage in the music where you're dealing with sort of the mix of professional and non-professional musicians, and sometimes how that can be a bit of a tension as well. So I mean, running an amateur band, in the beginning we didn't really charge money or anything because it's just a hobby, but then you realize, oops, actually that's a problem, because then you're undercutting other musicians who live off this music, and then you kind of realize you have to. So that's why we charge. We're not playing for free, because it's not that we need the money, but we're realizing we're making ourselves popular with other people if we don't do it. So anyway, so that's another sort of thing that I thought was, that's pretty interesting.
Right. By professional and non-professional, what do you mean? Just like people who use
living of the music
source of,
primary source of income. Yeah,
I gotcha.
And that sometimes is also then, sometimes you have, this is all very subjective, but I have sometimes, look, I'm not considering myself a particularly good player, but I'm probably reasonably okay for being an amateur guitar player in this music. And sometimes you get situations where you have someone who's a professional musician living on this music, and then you have someone who is not, but they might play this music style better or be more into it than others, and that can cause tension.
Right.
It's a kind of a very, it's a touchy subject. So it's like, okay, interesting. Yeah.
You said something about not wanting to undercut those. You said something about not wanting to undercut those who kind of play this as a profession or something like that. I didn't quite. Can't quite recall.
So yes.
If you could go into more detail about how you believe playing for free kind of undercuts it, That would be appreciated.
Okay, so what I mean, and I don't think this is anything to do with the style as such. I think this is probably something that will be general in different kinds of styles of music. So what I mean is that, so say for example, if we we go ahead and we agree to play at a gig, it might be a public venue, or maybe it could be a private party for that matter, and we agree to pay for free or very very little pay, right?
Mhm.
Because we don't really need the money, and that's not, we do it because we want to do it. It's not because this is not our income, Then what we are doing is that we are arguably contributing to a downward pressure. We're normalizing it for venues to sort of say, oh well, we don't really need to, you are it becomes deflation for others, right? So one venue, so a professional musician might expect to get a certain amount of money for a gig, but then we come in there and say, oh, but we can play for much less or for free. Then what happens is that we get the gig, and the guy who lives of music needs this, relies on this as a source of income.
Right.
Either then don't get the gig, or has to then we kind of forcing them indirectly to then lower what they're willing to pay or receive an income.
I get you.
And so that's something that I never thought about, to be honest. But then so this is a real problem, and I think it's fair enough. Like it is not right of us to do that. So what we do now is that we do charge some money, and we just use that money to fund our hobby, basically.
I understand. Thank you. Also, are there any other recommended materials which you would recommend investigating?
Yes. So what I would do is on YouTube, there are two channels that are quite interesting to look at, where you can not only see examples of people playing, but also interviews and things like that. Mm-hmm. Oh, hold on. One thing first, you probably maybe seen this already, but I would look at Dennis Chang's website and his blog, because he has really, in my judgment, he's not academic, but he has really he's really good insight into this music, and he has a lot of reflexivity around some of the things we talked about. So the ethnic dimension, the racial. He's well aware of the problematic use of the term gypsy jazz and things like that. So look at him, look at his videos, YouTube videos, things like that. Some of them are quite long, where he talks about all this stuff. He's great for this thing.
I did see in some of the articles I've been investigating, I saw people referenced his website, and I didn't go and investigate it because I'm like, I can't just reference some dude's website, but I'll definitely give it a look now.
Yeah, and he even has a blog post, a long one, about just the name Django. Like, where does that come from? Yeah. And another one is on the term gypsy jazz, and a video also, a YouTube video, and where he shows on the guitars. So when I said earlier, that there are certain different styles, different regions, he demonstrates on the guitar and that kind of thing. It's quite interesting to look at. So I'll look at gypsy. I will look at Dennis Chang, basically. I would also, there's a YouTube channel called Patrus 53. So this is Patrus, is a Canadian French guy. He and 53 is the year that Django died.
Right.
Okay. So he doesn't play himself, but he's a video blogger, basically. So he's a bit quiet now. He hasn't done many videos for a while, but he has hundreds of quite good quality videos from festivals, and it's performances, interviews. It's just Django, all of this stuff all the time. You can binge watch for days. There will be many hours, and it's great. And all the top players, they do that. And another one is Irene Ippenberg from the Netherlands. She plays herself. She's not a very good player, but she plays. And what's cool with her is that I had the honor of playing with her, actually, and Cameron Jones, when she was in Canberra some years ago. So there's a video, actually a YouTube video, where I'm in it on her. So she used to be a journalist, so she's quite good, because she's good at interviewing people. So she's similar to Patrus. She has this Gypsy Jazz video YouTube channel. Same thing, just endless interviews, and she has a really nice interview with John Larson from Host Club de Norvège, and he talks a lot about sort of how this. He talks a lot about the Renaissance from the 1980s onwards, how this sort of genre came about, and again, fully aware that no one talked about gypsy jazz until maybe 80s, 90s. This is starting to take off.
Mm-hmm.
So I would look. It's endless. There's so much information there. Cool. So I will just look at some of that stuff.
Definitely will.
You can go on YouTube, Facebook, and the Australian Gypsy Jazz Facebook group.
Yep.
And there are all kinds of things that's being discussed.
Awesome.
There. It's last year or a few years, it's been a bit quiet. So it's not that active at the moment, but you can search and things, and you might be able to get some fascinating searches there, to sort of look at what people talk about.
I get you.
And there's everything under the sun about. I mean, sometimes you have these super nerdy discussions around the anxiety-provoking thing about having checking in your guitar when you fly. Because you're afraid that the guitar is going to be broken, right? Which happens sometimes, right? And so sometimes you end up. That's a while ago about that stuff, but anyway,
okay,
endless
awesome.
stuff. Yeah.
I'll definitely email you asking for some specific details, some names which I didn't quite catch there. But I think that's all I have to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Unless there's anything else you want to mention before I go.
No, I think that's about it. Feel free to send me an email if you have follow-up questions. And obviously this is a hobby of mine, so I'm very happy to talk about it.
Yeah, no, it was very productive. I appreciate you coming by and doing the interview. It was really helpful.
No problem. Yes, and all the best of luck with the assignment.
Thank you. And sorry, what did you teach at ANU?
So I'm an anthropologist here at ANU, and my area of research expertise has to do with development aid, security, and migration in Southeast Asia. So I've done a lot of work on things like human trafficking and things like that. So
right,
so quite different to this, But you know what? This thing is this. I may later on at one point. I'm thinking maybe I should, because I'm so into this, maybe I'm going to turn this into a bit of a pet project and do some research on it. We'll see. By the way, Lachlan, his honors thesis was on Django. You know that?
Yeah, he did mention he did it on Django.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So it should be in the library. You might want to have a look.
I thought, I will. I'll give it a look, definitely. Well, thank you so much for the interview again. It's been
pleasure.
Helpful. It's also been fun to talk about it.
Yes.
I guess I'll shoot you a follow-up email a bit later.
Yeah,
but that's fine. All I need for now.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Ryan, and have a good weekend.
All right. See you too, man.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.